Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Tuesday, and that means Tag Tuesday. I was tagged in a tag just recently by Book Chat with Pat. She tagged me in a tag made by Aaron Read a Book, which I always think of with the comma. I always think of it as Aaron Read a Book. I'll leave links to both those channels. This is the BookTuber Name Tag, where Aaron came up with a bunch of interesting prompts just based off things suggested to him by the names of BookTuber channels. And I liked it. I like it very much. So I thought I would use it as an opportunity just to put a few more books in front of your face. So prompt number one is Books I'm Not Reading. Kelly's channel, Books I'm Not Reading. A book that's been on your TBR forever. And we stumble right out of the starting gate because I don't do that. I don't do that. I don't have, that copy of The Count of Monte Cristo just waiting up there for 50 years. I don't do that. The book that would qualify, the books that would qualify the most would be technically the galley copies for stuff that is coming out in August and September and October. I think I even have a couple for November. I guess you could say that if in May I got an August galley, then it has been sitting on my shelf forever. But not in the way that this prompt intends. It's not sitting there because I just haven't got around to it. So I'm not going to read it until closer to the time of its release date. I have a whole bookcase. That's why I keep looking off camera there. I'm looking at the bookcase. I have a whole bookcase for those galley copies. My work bookcase. And there are books on there that I've had for weeks or even months that I haven't read and have no intention of reading until I get closer to their pub date. But the rest of it? No. No. So let's just move on to prompt number two. Novel idea. A book with an interesting premise or plot device. I want to go with a book that I've mentioned a few times before. It's also been mentioned on a few other BookTube channels. It's China Miéville, and this is his book, The City and the City. I even worked up visual prompts so you wouldn't have to stare at my bulbous nose the whole time. And this is... China Miéville is known for Perdido Street Station. He's known for a weird blend of science fiction and fantasy. And I guess you could sort of lump this book in there. It very carefully is not. It very carefully is not science fiction or fantasy. But it is weird. It is downright weird. It's two cities that exist in the same place but don't overlap. They don't notice each other. And their citizens don't notice each other. And there are checkpoints. There are throughways that you can go from one city to another. Now, technically speaking, physically speaking, you could just walk across the street. You could just walk to the neighboring block, which happens to be in the other city. But no, absolutely not. Everyone is conditioned, absolutely conditioned, that is not true. So that if you are walking down the street in one of these cities, these two cities that are right next to each other, they're right on top of each other, that are each other. If you're walking down the street in one of those cities and a pedestrian is hit by a car, technically in the other city, you don't see it. And you will not be questioned about it because it didn't happen in your city. It's hard to describe, but it is masterfully executed. Just masterfully executed. And there is a murder mystery in here, and there is also, at the end of the book, a solution. An explanation is given for why these two cities exist the way they do. I think it was probably meant to be, not that it matters, but it was probably meant to be Miéville's fantasy or science fiction meditation on East and West Germany, on ideological separation of peoples. It doesn't. The concluding reveal, the big gimmick at the end, does not work, but it doesn't work in most. The big gimmick at the reveal at the end of China Miéville novels usually doesn't work. You're still going to remember this thing forever. The basic premise here is so intriguing that you're going to remember it forever. So let's see. Prompt number 3 is Revenant Reads. Vin at Revenant Reads, our dauntless captain for Book Trek 2024. A book where someone has returned from the dead. I'm going to stretch the point here a bit when talking about biographies. Critics, including myself, will often say that the book brings the subject to life. I don't often say that because biographies so seldom do that. Although I have a couple of biographies on this list that come close. But I recently read, this year, I read a book that really does bring its subject as close to life as you can get. That really does bring the subject back to life. But it's not a biography. It's a huge collection of the letters of Emily Dickinson. from Harvard University Press. They did a big volume of the letters of Emily Dickinson a long time ago, decades ago, and they've come out with a big new edition. And I've always mentioned on this channel that with major new releases, I tend to read them twice at least. I tend to read straight through, pencils down, experientially. What is this like as a reading experience? Because that's you. I'm not writing for other critics. And I'm not writing for book snobs. Certainly, I'm not writing for book snobs. If I could do anything for book snobs, it would be to pull a big Three Stooges style lever that would cause the floor to fall out underneath them and they'd just disappear. But I can't do that. Instead, I'm writing for the omnivorous, intelligent general reader. And if I go into a book critically at first, just, okay, where does this work? How does this work? What are you doing here? Is this substantiated or whatnot? A lot of those aren't the kinds of questions that kind of reader is going to ask. So I like to read it first, just with my whole brain, to get a sense of what it's like as a reading experience. And then I read it again critically. And then usually with these things, I will read them again. If I ever get another copy or if I ever find it down the line, I'll read it another time when suddenly I'm not involved at all. If that isn't a weird way to put it, suddenly my profession is not involved at all. I'm just reading it as a civilian, as a bystander. That is not true for the first two readings. The first reading is very much meant to form a critical reading of the book. The critical reading of the book is something that not every reader is going to do. And I read this big collection of letters of Emily Dickinson that way. I did it first experientially and was in the room with this weirdo. I was in the room with this weird person and increasingly affectionate towards her in a way that I don't remember the previous edition of these letters doing for me. I had the previous edition. I read it, had it on my shelf forever and ever. I don't know. I finished it and I thought, how wonderful to have spent a whole weekend with Emily Dickinson. And then weeks and weeks pass, and then I read it again. I read it critically, and that initial impression did not change. That ordinarily never happens. Ordinarily, that impression changes, or is informed to the point where I barely recognize the first impression. But this one didn't change at all. It's just a wonderful volume. That's all. And the critical apparatus that I paid close attention to the second time around only adds to that effect. I don't know if maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just not attuned to Emily Dickinson's poetry. But I like this volume. I like her letters a lot more than I like her poems. And that makes me feel a little guilty because I just recently saw a wonderful short by Ellie Cordova. And if you've been trapped over here at Hyde Cottage or for Wine and Calzones, I probably recommended her to you on a number of occasions. She does basically they're Vine shorts, but Vine doesn't exist anymore. They're wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Her Vine short on A Meeting of the Planets, it's just great. Just fantastic. And she did one. She did a rap, not safe for work, rap, a song about Emily Dickinson. If I can remember, I'll leave a link to it on this video. It takes 2 seconds to watch, and it is wonderful. She is a diehard fan of Emily Dickinson. God only knows what Emily Dickinson herself would have made of that short, but maybe that put Emily Dickinson on the mind for me. But this is my answer to this one, is the letters of Emily Dickinson to bring her back alive. Then prompt number 4 is CriminOlly, a book where crime takes place. And I have one in mind, a novel that I read a long time ago. I think I wrote about it. It's by Martín Caparrós, and it's called Valfierno. And it takes you back to 1911, to a crime that most people don't know took place. And maybe only a handful of people know the full truth. This is a novel about the theft of the Mona Lisa, which was stolen from the Louvre in 1911 and was missing from the world for a long time, for a couple of years. Picture the Gardner heist. 30 years ago, there was a famous art thief theft at the Gardner Museum here in Boston. Thieves waited until nighttime, dressed themselves up as cops, got into the museum after hours, incapacitated the ineffectual security guards, had the run of the place all night long, stole priceless artworks, including a famous Rembrandt. And that artwork has never been seen again, and will never be seen again. it is almost certainly destroyed. Or in a private possession that will never see the light of day. That's been a long time. Visitors to that museum have not seen, no one in the world has seen those paintings with their own eyes. You can see reproductions of them, but no one has seen those paintings with their own eyes, walked right up to them, looked at the crackwork in the paintings and the varnish in all that time. That could easily have been the Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world. It was gone for a long time, not just a minute, but a long time. And when it was found by a doofus, know-nothing Yahoo trying to sell it to a fence. And the story that the world was meant to believe is that he's the one who stole it, and he kept the Mona Lisa under his bed that whole time. Now, okay, you want to believe that, that's fine. There's another scenario that I want you to entertain. How long would it take you if you had spent 10 years ransacking archives and estate sales and I don't even know, art fairs? How long would it take you to find 4 or 5 stretches of canvas that were from the same time period as when the Mona Lisa was roughly finished by Leonardo da Vinci? How long would it take you to find? There is canvas from that time period. How long would it take you to find that? Okay. Then factor in, how long would it take you to find pigments that either are aged from Da Vinci's time or that you could age convincingly to Da Vinci's time using technology available in, let's say, 1908? Okay, fine. Then, how long would it take you to mimic the crack work? All old varnished paintings have there's actually a term for it. They have the cracking in the varnish happens, and it happens in an incredibly distinct way for each painting. It's like a fingerprint. And the way the crack work works for the Mona Lisa is known down to the millimeter. Okay, how long would it take you to imitate that crack work on the right aged canvas with the right aged frame and the right aged equipment and technology? How long would it take you to do that? Is it, if you have all the raw materials in place, about the same amount of time that this Yahoo claimed to have had the Mona Lisa under his bed? This novel is terrific. It's very fever dreamy. You really feel the title. You really feel like you're inside the weird, all-corrosive concupiscence of the people that are involved here. And of course, the novel is animated by what I won't say of course. I shouldn't say of course. I think it's certainly a reasonable supposition that the Mona Lisa people have been looking at in the Louvre for the last 100 years is not the original. I think it is a reasonable supposition. I don't know why we're even talking about this. Of course it's not. Of course it's not. Of course this guy, who is nobody and couldn't think of anything, didn't walk out with Mona Lisa under his arm and keep it under his bed for 2 years. It's such a stupid story. Anyway, that's what this is about. And no matter how you slice it, it's about a crime. Either it's about some doofus stealing the Mona Lisa, not knowing what to do with it, running the risk of it being caught in a house fire or eaten by rats or roaches, and then getting caught when he tries to sell it, or it's the crime of someone stealing the Mona Lisa successfully, substituting, and adding a substitute, so that somewhere you can walk into a private collection and see the Mona Lisa. The real Mona Lisa. The original Mona Lisa. Much the same. Is it the same private collection where you can see Storm on a Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt? Anyway, that's the crime. That's the book. I don't know if Val Fierno is still in print. I wrote about it once upon a time. I don't know if that review is findable now that I think about it, so maybe best not to mention it. Then number 5 is Book Time with Elvis. A book about time travel, or someone named Elvis. Well, no offense to Mark's adorable dog, but there's only one person named Elvis. And I thought of a biography right away. This is Peter Guralnick's book, Last Train to Memphis, which is about Elvis Presley becoming Elvis Presley. This is, I think, the most fascinating part of Presley's story. after you get to the end of this book, after you get to the end of this period in Presley's life, I know that people like to dress it up. They like to talk about, you know, the Elvis Presley movies, for instance, the Elvis Presley musicals, what they do to Elvis, cut his balls off, or the bloated Las Vegas act or whatnot. I know people like to talk about, you know, the mythic significance of all of those things. After this period in Elvis's life, the story is just drugs. It's just the story of a drug addiction. It's just Kurt Cobain. And I know we like to dress those up and we like to talk about tortured artists and whatnot, but there is nothing more boring than a drug addict. There's nothing more boring than their story. Because their story has literally been reduced to one thing only, the drug. That's it. That's all that a drug addict cares about, the drug. That's all they think about. That's all they care about. That's all they ever do. That's what they're all organized around, and that's what's going to kill them. So after that point, it gets really dull. I know that's heresy when it comes to the king, but I think this is the interesting part of his story. And boy, oh boy, does this book do a great job at it. Just a fantastic job. Let's see here. Prompt number 6 is middle of the book, March. Your favorite book that you read on March 7th. I actually went to my reading journal and checked, and we get another mention of Isabella Stewart Gardner because it's Natalie Dykstra's biography of Isabella Stewart Gardner, Chasing Beauty. This is the diminutive socialite who gave her name to, well, her house, Fenway Court, is now the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum here in Boston, which is really a must-see if you're coming to Boston. It's an amazing art museum, amazingly different art museum. You've got the two kinds of art museums in any big city. Any big city will have the two kinds of art museums. One is the big industrial, branded, marketed type thing with the metal detectors and the gigantic crowds. Your art museum. So the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And almost always in a good city, a city with good art representation, there'll be another museum that is more of a converted home. It's more of a strange experience. Ordinarily, the building itself is a work of art. Think the Frick in New York City. Well, the same thing is true here in Boston. We have the MFA. We have the Museum of Fine Arts. And then just a block away, we have the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And they are both great art museums, but radically different experiences. And I went into Natalie Dykstra's book here with a little bit of trepidation, just a bit of trepidation, because, well, Isabella Stewart Gardner has had a few major biographies, 2 major biographies in the last few decades, and by weird coincidence, I knew and was friends with the authors of both those books. so getting to this one where I don't know Natalie Dykstra from a hole in the wall, it was weird. It was the first time I ever read the first time I've ever read an Isabella Stewart Gardner biography when I could not hear the author's voice in my head. I don't know what Natalie Dykstra sounds like. I've never had wine and calzones with Natalie Dykstra. This was just a book about Isabella Stewart Gardner. That was weird and off-put me at first. I did end up enjoying it, and the more I think about it, the more I like it. So that was March. That was March 7th, I think. I'm pretty sure that was March 7th. Then we have prompt number 7, Book Buds, a book with a great friendship. This is an author I've written about before. I'm not sure that I've written about this book, but it was utterly charming. The author is Will Schraube, who did the End of the Life book club, and this is his book, We Should Not Be Friends, which is a really loving memoir about what an awkward youth he was, and the giant golden boy that became his friend somehow. And that is interesting. The clash of personalities is interesting. The way that this author does that is interesting. I really recommend his End of Life book club. I really recommend that. If you're just as a book about books, I really recommend that. But I recommend this one too because although he does the personalities really well in these pages, really the thing that jumped out to me here is it's not heavy-handed. It won't beat you over the head, but the study of what friendship actually is. What is friendship? What? I love it when books examine that. I love it when they show me that, but I also love it when they examine it. I think that's fascinating, especially when the elements of whatever friendship is are thrown into high relief by the fact that the two people are very different. This has often been the case in my own life with humans. With dogs, it's not that we're very different. It's that we're very, very similar. As any of you who have ever been here can attest. It's not that we're very different with dogs. It's that we're very, very similar. Basically the same person. But with humans, very often, there are vast gulfs of difference. It's not often that I have somebody over here for wine and calzones where I call up, let's say, a video clip or a music clip, and the other person just goes, "Oh, perfect." That very seldom happens. That's only happened once in a long, long time of having people over here. I'm not decrying it. It's actually wonderful. A little bit eerie, but wonderful. The way that that kind of similarity is going to fall apart is with music. So if you have a guest over and the wine has been flowing and you're both a little tipsy and the friend decides to start playing song after song just clipped from YouTube, and you're both overjoyed, that is extremely rare. Usually it's something like this. Usually it's people who really you wouldn't picture that they would be friends. That's been the case with me most of the time. And this really brings that out. Really does a great job with it. Then question number 8 is an obscure book adventures, a book that you love that never gets talked about. Well, the book that I love that never gets talked about at least gets talked about by me, and it is Meg by Steve Alton. His novel about a giant prehistoric killer shark, a megalodon, that somehow exists in the modern era and somehow gets to the surface where it starts to eat whales and boats and dinghies and people until it is finally vanquished by a valiant marine biologist. The sea was angry that day, my friends, like an old man trying to send back soup at a deli. So I'm going to say Meg. Then prompt number 9, Savage Reads, a book with a monster or beast or human acting monstrous or beastly. Now, I am right at ground zero of this particular prompt because I have spent the last 2 months studying serial killers. For a freelance project that has paid out but does not seem to be over. It does not seem to be over. It's possible that I'm going to get pulled right back in. My project was about one particular serial killer. But me being me, I went down a bunch of different rabbit holes. I looked at basically the top 20 or 25 serial killers. The most prominent, the most garish, the highest body count, whatnot. Not counting here the smiley face killers, which we don't know that there are smiley face killers. We don't know that that exists. We don't know that there's anything to that theory. Seems to have as many holes as not. Leaving that aside, the ones that we know for sure, the ones where there's forensic evidence, I went down deep into 20 or 25 of those serial killers. Any one of whom would qualify for this prompt. One of the books that I read is comparatively recent. It's an update of, I guess you could call it a true crime classic. It's by Terry Sullivan, and he was helped out by Peter Mikan, and this is Killer Clown. This is the updated version of the old, you might have seen an old battered paperback called Killer Clown. This is about John Wayne Gacy from 50 years ago. Who, I don't know. The more I've read about these creatures, the less I think I understand them. Even though my brain is putting together all sorts of profile commonalities, I still don't think I understand them all. I mean, John Wayne Gacy had a horrible upbringing. He had a horrible childhood. He had a horribly abusive father. And he also was, as is the pattern with a lot of these mid-20th century serial killers, a repressed and self-loathing gay. He knew exactly where his desires lie. Society didn't allow him to express that. Okay, that part I understand. It was no picnic being gay in the early 1960s. That I understand. Society didn't allow him to do anything about that except furtively. You could do something furtively. A lot of men did. Bathhouses, restrooms, the bushes along the Fenway. You risk everything. You risk everything. If you're a sub-editor or an insurance salesman or whatnot, and you get caught, the police decide they're going to run dogs through the bushes of the Fenway or Soldiers Field Park or whatever, your whole life will end. Your name will be publicized. You'll lose your wife. You'll lose your kids. You'll lose your job. You'll lose your house. You'll lose everything. So that's not a good way. I suppose it's preferable to killing people. But anyway, Gacy had a run-in with the law when he was a young man. When he was in his 20s, he had a run-in with the law. Uh, a young man, he pressed sexual advances on a young man. They were not welcome. The young man testified against him. And the police didn't have anything on assault or coercion or threatening a witness or anything like that. Gacy did all of those things with the young man. But they didn't have any evidence, no firm evidence that would work. So all they could charge him with was sodomy. And Gacy was 100% sure, upstanding citizen, no criminal record. Sodomy was a fairly minor charge at the particular time and place where he was charged with it. Something like a civil disobedience. He was he was a confident guy anyway, but he was pretty confident that that would not be much. That if he were in court and slightly penitent, he'd get a slap on the wrist. Instead, he got a 10-year prison sentence. 10 years in prison. He was devastated, and he went to jail. He went to prison, and he was a charismatic guy. He got the whole prison to like him in very little time. Got promoted, I guess you could say. He got more and more privileges as a prisoner, and also was released in 18 months. 18 months out of 10 years. Now, okay. A horrible childhood, a repressed homosexual urges that got him into horrible trouble, could have derailed his life forever. 10 years in prison? You don't come back from that. He didn't do that. He managed to charm and work his way out of that. This was a time before the internet, so if he moves away from that prison, no one's going to know. He can leave that off his resume, and no one's going to know. They aren't going to, unless law enforcement does a deep background check. No one's going to know, especially if you're charming and capable, which Gacy was. A normal person would have had that happen and said, well, okay, warning received. I have these urges. I want to act on them, but I have seen what happens when I do, so I can't. I don't like that. That's not fair, but I can't, so I'm not going to. I'm going to marry, which Gacy did. I'm going to have children, which Gacy did. I'm going to become a well-respected pillar of the community, which Gacy did. There comes a point in the John Wayne Gacy story where you look at it and you say, all right, if you just stop there, okay, you learned your lesson. You know that life is unfair, and you know that you can't act on these urges, especially not in a criminal, brutal, violent way. You've got it all. You've got the American dream. Leave it at that. Leave it at that. You'll get a park bench named after you when you die. Instead, no. Some wiring was off, and he just started preying on young men. Same ways he had before, only this time much worse. This time killing them. Brutalizing and killing them. And I learned a lot about this character that I didn't know before. I read the original Killer Clown, and then I read this updated version. Gacy was... I remember the news. I remember what it was like, with the news pulling body after body after body after body out of this normal suburban house. It was just it doesn't exist anymore, but it was just a normal suburban house. And I remember when the news broke. I was in the news media when the news broke, and I was thinking, okay, all right, this guy, I don't know anything about this story, but they pulled a dead body out of his house. Oh, isn't that weird? That's a great macabre story. That's like something out of Patricia Highsmith. He was keeping a dead body in his house. And then it just became surreal as the police would pull one body after another. It became a macabre ritual to watch these plastic bagged body remains being pulled out of this suburban house. One after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. The coroner would come to meet the news gaggle in front of the house, and they would ask him, how many bodies today? And he'd say 6. They found another 7. And the reason there's an update on this is not only because Gacy lived a long time in prison, and he gave a long interview, so there was new material, but also because some of those bodies in that crawl space were not identified. I think a couple of them have yet to be identified. Even with forensic equipment that we have now that didn't exist then. But there was plenty of reason to give an update on this. It's not a pleasant update at all. It's, the cover photo is famously a mugshot. There were plenty of normal pictures of John Wayne Gacy. This is the one where he looks unshaven and demented. Because when he was arrested, the police had him set up for his mugshot picture, and they asked him, at the same time they were getting background information from him, and they asked him where he was born, and he said, "I was born in a state of confusion," and started chuckling at his own dumb joke, and they took the picture right while he was laughing at that dumb joke. So, a monster, definitely. Whatever he was when he was 25, it might not have been good. Many of us are purely good at age 25. It might not have been good. Whatever he was at age 25, I believe, needed a strong, rolled-up newspaper slapped across the nose. Whatever you are now, and we understand that some of it is not of your own doing and a lot of it is not fair, but whatever you are now, you need to rein it in. You need to not be... there are two paths here. You need to take the normal one, not the other one. And by age 28, that he had firmly decided, no. I don't know. The more I read about these people, the more I read about these monsters, the more I think that what we're looking at here is, in fact, the aforementioned drug addiction. That is what causes humans to act this way. To just say, I know, I'm not dumb, I know the consequences of what I'm doing. I just can't stop myself. I just won't stop myself. I won't stop myself from doing this. That's drug addict thinking. I can't help but think, I mean, in another example, actually a couple of other serial killer examples, the henchmen that they get, a lot of times they get henchmen. John Wayne Gacy, I don't think ever had a henchman. There's one of his murders that raises a red flag. You actually think, okay, that doesn't seem possible without a henchman. He wasn't in town. It doesn't seem possible he could have done that without somebody else involved. And naturally, when he was fighting for his life, when he knew that the state wanted to kill him, he was floating every theory in the world, including that somebody else did these murders, but also that he had help. But there are often henchmen involved, and the henchmen will often survive and report that the main villain, the bad guy, the serial killer, would kill someone, and it would be like a high. And it was only when that had worn off in days or weeks that they would start to get jittery, physically jittery, like they needed another hit. It strip away the horror of it being done with human lives, and it really does look like drug addiction. But I'm not diving deep into the subject because I'm hoping that I don't have to. I'm hoping the rest of my summer is not reclaimed by serial killers. But anyway, The Killer Clown is what we'll do here. The title coming from the fact that John Wayne Gacy, in his role as an upstanding member of the community, his friends and neighbors loved him. His community loved him. He organized all sorts of events for the poor, for civic pride, and also volunteered time as a clown at children's events. So that's what this means. Anyway, it's a technically incorrect title because he never actually killed anyone dressed as a clown. Okay, not that that matters. Anyway, prompt number 10, a book that fits your own channel name or the name of a channel that you love. Well, my own channel name is Michael Seth Smith's biography of me when I was a young man, when I was a flatback jockey in the Victorian era. Michael Seth Smith wrote a biography of me that I thought was quite fair. I don't know how collectible it is now, but it serves well as a glimpse at my distant past when I was a young and athletic Steve Donoghue. And, of course, I can't be stretching the blanket here because if you go online and look me up, you will see pictures of me as a jockey under Queen Victoria. And the internet can't be wrong. Anyway, the only other tag left here, the only other prompt is to tag other booktubers, and I don't know who to tag. Tagging for me is such a minefield. If you are a booktuber and you watch my channel and you like my channel and you don't hate me and you don't mind being tagged and you want to do this tag, feel free. But that's a lot of ifs. That's a lot of hurdles to cross, so I'm going to leave it up to you. If you fit all of those criteria, then definitely do this, because this is fun. This is a fun tag. So I'll leave links to Aaron Read a Book and Book Chat with Pat, and I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTuber.